CEO who spoke about the 75th anniversary of the foundation, how it had, let it be known, recently visited the historic True Reformer Building in Washington, D.C., which houses the Public Welfare Foundation, the country's only endowment fund dedicated to catalyzing new transformative approaches to youth and adult criminal justice. We met with Candice Jones, the Public Welfare Foundation's president and CEO, who spoke about the 75th anniversary of the foundation, how it has adapted to meet the challenges of changing times, how it continues to advance justice and opportunity for people in need. In our discussion, Jones noted that by focusing their efforts on criminal justice and youth justice reforms, it allows the foundation to achieve greater impact in the overhaul of the systems that were created to marginalize and contain the country's most vulnerable populations.
The True Reformer Society was a society of individuals who came together to pool resources because they wanted to be able to offer services that they knew we wouldn't be able to get on the market. And that is people who were fleeing racial terror in the South. You couldn't go out in 1889 and 1900 and buy an insurance and be insured that actually when it came due, it was going to be honored by traditional companies. You couldn't walk into a bank and just get a small business loan. And so this society was creating that kind of agency for people who were moving up for the South, for the Black community. When they came together and pooled their resources, they worked with John Anderson Langford, this image, to design this building. He was the only licensed architect at the time, at least that we know of in the district, and he designed the building. And every subcontractor, everybody that worked on this building was Black. It was built by Black people with Black resources, and it feels so incredibly important for us that it be available to people doing that kind of work on behalf of racial equity, on behalf of the Black community and transformative work. It was built for it, like quite literally.
Candice also discussed America's incarceration crisis and noted how the Public Welfare Foundation continues to focus on community-led restorative and racial justice.
And we're celebrating our 75th year this year, and we're a national grant-making organization. So basically, we exist to give money away to other organizations that do good work. We were founded by a wealthy individual. That money was left when they passed on, and we're still giving it away today. And right now, we focused on giving money around criminal and youth justice reform in jurisdictions all over the country. And we have a particular emphasis on giving resources to Black-led, Indigenous, people of color-led organizations, and organizations led by people who were impacted by the justice system. So
that's a whole lot, especially you talk about African Americans, and you're talking about, for instance, youth justice.
Yeah.
So when you think about youth justice,
Yeah.
where does the Public Welfare Foundation come into play here, and what are you looking for organizations to as far as their support of youth justice, and define youth justice for us too?
For us, youth justice really is about focusing on youth, and how that's defined state by state actually gets kind of complicated. But usually it's something under 18, right? Someone who is not yet considered an adult. So if they are in conflict with the law, if they're arrested, if they are being prosecuted for something, going through the court system, or in custody, they're still considered a youth. And we focus on those youth nationally in philanthropy. There are groups that will fund education. They'll fund child welfare. They'll fund children who they think are still cute and redeemable. But there becomes a point when a child does something that we think, oh, we're ready to throw this one away. And that's actually where public welfare starts funding. We want to focus on those kids because we don't believe that any of them are worth throwing away. They're redeemable. And organizations that are like, this is how we should respond to a youth in crisis to ensure that they're protected and that their potential for rehabilitation is met.
So you're intervening when there's a problem, but I also have read that you try to step in before there's trouble. Talk about that.
The most accurate response is that we fund organizations that step in before there's trouble, because we really give money, but we focus on those organizations that are all about saying, These people are redeemable. So we want to get resources to communities of color that tend to be over-policed, that tend to spend too much time being incarcerated, and support the kind of program and services that are going to make that community more healthy. But even once a kid with program and services, they fall between the cracks, we want to be an organization that supports institutions that are trying to be those cracks and saying, this kid isn't a throwaway, we're still going to support them, we're going to support them through their system involvement, and we're going to support them as they return to their community, because that kind of support of human beings is what really keeps people safe.
And what have you found? I'm sure there's been research. What have you found to be the results? Are you getting the results, the desired results?
Research shows that program and services, pound for pound, net better results than spending money on incarceration. Meaning that a youth that gets services and supports is diverted is going to have better chances of outcomes than that youth that you arrest and you send to a prison system. So we know that making those bets are important. Just really starting to scale those investments and getting other institutions and frankly public support to make those kind of investments are important. As a social experiment, we see it every day. We call it influence, right? It's what happens when you have wealthy communities as opposed to poor ones. We pour money into those communities so that their folks can be healthy, happy, and thrive. And by contrast, that lack of investment sort of bears out in communities in America each and every day.
Now, you're 75 years you're celebrating this year.
But not me personally, but you know.
Well, like I said earlier, I mean, I don't know how you got this job so young, but 75 years, though, it's quite the milestone.
Yeah.
And to do the work you're doing, what should people know? What would you like people to know as you hit this 75-year milestone? I mean, 3/4 of a century.
Yeah. I want them to know that public welfare exists for the people. When it was founded, the organization, the original funding was all about proximity. The founder was giving grants to women in a community that they lived in to do micro grants, right? Creating that discourse before it was even a thing. They were giving, they would buy gold wedding bands for couples so that they could actually get married, and they would buy them gold bands to incentivize that. Why? Because men were dying, they weren't legally married, and their land and housing would pass to their brothers, leaving the women and their children interstate, right? Leaving them poor and destitute. And so they wanted to incentivize that. It was all about simple solutions, betting on people, proximity. And 75 years later, that's what we're doing. We focus on jurisdiction, saying to those people, we want to empower you, give you the resources to drive change, because tipping that balance, not having funding and resources and power be so top down, is really how we're going to create agency, equity, and sort of the racial equity that we are still fighting for.
Well, I'd imagine, too, that you get a lot of requests from organizations, a whole lot.
Yeah.
How do you vet them, and what's the process, and what do you look for?
We have a process that we call letter of interest. So organizations can go to our website. We will give some guidelines of the type of things we fund, focusing on our jurisdictions, our issue area, and they'll have to answer some questions. They can review that first and determine if they're even eligible, because organizations will come to us for all kinds of things. By and large, if you're not doing criminal or youth justice, that's not what we fund. They'll go through that criteria even amongst those two issue areas. And then a team of people on our once a month, they sit down and they go through all the applications, and we decide which ones make sense for us to fund based on what we're doing right now.
Yeah, and let's talk about this. We're here on historic U Street.
Yeah.
But really, what blew me away is this true reformer building. Got her to dance.
I know.
But I mean, it's spectacular.
Yeah.
Talk about the origins of this building and some of the history that people should know about.
I love to talk about the True Reformer building. It's an esteemed history. I'm very much a person that respects place. Washington, D.C., right here on U Street, the corner of 12th and U, we're sitting in the historic True Reformer building. The True Reformer Society was a society of Black people that would pool resources, have a social club, do different things at the turn of the last century. But one of the things they also did was pool resources to be able to offer services to people who were fleeing racial terror from the South, because right down the street was a tenant encampment. So they'd set up tents for people who were fleeing the South. And they would use their money to be able to offer them services, insurance, small business loans, things that if you were Black at that time, you couldn't go out to the market and get that. You couldn't buy an insurance premium and actually believe that it was going to be honored when the note came due. And so they wanted to provide that to our community. In 1900, they worked with a Black architect, John Anderson Langford, to design this building. And in 1903, it opened.
A Black architect?
A Black architect, John Anderson Langford. Every sub, every contractor, everything that went into this building was Black funded, Black labor, and Black owned.
1903.
1903, it's
All
been
Black.
here. Yep.
That is really incredible. That's a story within itself. And then I go out, you took me outside.
Yeah.
The
Bored you to
mural.
death.
Well, no, not at all. You surprised me because, I mean, I passed by here before a number of times, actually, because the NNPA's headquarters is right down the street.
Yeah.
And you showed me this incredible mural of Duke Ellington.
Yeah.
What's the significance of that? Because there's also something of Duke inside the building, too.
So Duke Ellington grew up right around the corner from this building, literally not a full city block away. And he would come here and play and did some of his first concerts when he was a young artist here because it was a community center. It was a place where he hosted events. And the historic Duke Ellington mural on U Street sits on the side of this building right under the True Reformer building sign, which I think is just a minted part of the history.
Well, and also you pay homage to the great boxer, Joe Louis, the Brown bomber.
Yes, sir. On the 4th floor, we have a story mural. He trained here when he was an athlete. And so we think it's important to continue telling those stories. U Street was a hub. It was a central vein, and the True Reformer building was a part of that history. The Duke Ellingtons, the Joe Louis, we want to pay homage to those stories.
And so this is true Black history. And you know, the big thing nowadays is critical race theory. They're not teaching any real history in school. It's American history, right?
That's right.
You walk into this building and you get that education immediately just by looking at the murals, looking around here. Why was that so important?
It was an intentional choice. You know, you and I have had some. Who tells history, right? The winners. They'll tell history, that's the legacy that'll be left. And it was really important to us that the stories of this place were told. So on the 5th floor of our building, we have a story mural that tells the history of the True Reformers, as I just told it to you. And then on the 4th floor, it tells the story of the Public Welfare Foundation with some notes to each other on the different floors. And it was done by a young Black mural artist in the district named Khalid Crosby, who also did the Dorothy Height mural, the Amanda Gorham mural that just went up after the inauguration. And we felt like it was an important part of the legacy to leave behind so that anybody walking through this building, anybody passing through their floors, they should know they're on sacred ground.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, you know, I want to go just backtrack for one moment. We talked about the Public Welfare Foundation.
Yeah.
And to a lot of African Americans in particular, that word welfare doesn't sit too well, right?
Yeah.
But give us the true meaning of that, particularly as it pertains to you guys and what you do here.
You know, it's funny because most people don't understand that one of the meanings of philanthropy is the love of mankind, right? That's what it means. And so when you think about that, when Charles Marsh, who was the public welfare founder, the man on whose wealth the organization was built, he said, he was like, we chose an intentionally wide pair of words so that the organization's history could evolve with time. It wasn't about calling it the Marsh Foundation, branding it around here, but this idea that it existed to support and improve the public welfare. I think it so much was living the essence of that idea of philanthropy, which is the love of mankind. We're here to make sure that that is health, that is a thing that is about wellness. And I think it's something we're still trying to fully grow into at this moment in history.
Yeah, you're giving a lot of money to organizations to make the community, really the country better.
Yeah.
And so I think that makes
so.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're doing a great job too. And as I said before, it's amazing to me how unsung the Public Welfare Foundation is. And we have to change that. But let's talk about you.
Uh-oh.
Let's dig deep here. No, but this has been what I've learned. It's really been your life's work, if not mission. Your care, your passion for youth and youth justice, as we talked about earlier, and the health and welfare of young people. Was there someone, perhaps a parent or someone who inspired you?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I always say this when I talk to young people myself. I'm like, this issue picked me, you know? And I feel like in a lifetime, like that was the easy part. It picked me. This is what I was put on this earth in this lifetime to do. It's the only thing I've done. It's the only thing that I'll ever do. My mother was all about service. Like we grew up Chicago, West Side, poor, but her idea was always if you have $2, and that means you have one to give. And so she ran a soup kitchen out of our church. On Sundays, we used to have to go early, and we go around. She'd be like, get them in here so they can get some food. And you know, Chicago is freezing cold, even in the summertime. You know, she'd be like, get out there, wrap that little scarf around, get people in here. And her big thing was like, this is not about preaching to people. They don't have to believe. This is about feeding them. This is about getting with them, because that's what faith, that's what it's all supposed to be about. It's supposed to be an act of service. And I think I just grew up with that. We also grew up in a community where it's like the blunt force of the criminal justice system, I was feeling well before I had words for it. You know, they were snatching my cousins, people I loved. And I went to become a lawyer because part of me just wanted to be armed with something to be able to protect them, right? Originally my family and loved ones, but ultimately my community against something that I felt even as a child was fundamentally unfair. And so it picked me, and I've been fighting it ever since.
Well, and it must frustrate you because you have such a passion and have always had this passion, especially for the youth. When you see something like what happened in Texas,
Yeah.
I mean, that breaks all of our hearts. But not just that, but it seems like we now live in a world where children, in particular the youth, are so overlooked and undervalued now. It used to be that, you know, they said it takes a village, and now that village seems to have been taken away. It's gone.
Yeah. It's a scary time in a lot of ways. Both hopeful, but also just really we're on the precipice of a lot of decision making. What has happened recently with high profile cases of youth and guns is hard because what you know is you have the Kyle Rittenhouse in Wisconsin, you have that young man that walked into a school in Michigan, you have this young man in Uvalde. What will ultimately happen is while this rhetoric is spewing around young kids armed with guns, is that we will create policies where the blunt force of that will hit Black youth, right? That's what happened coming out of Columbine, right? We got tough on crime, we got tough on Black youth. They will feel the weight of our society's outrage about what's happening right now. And it will take the focus off the thing that is the through line through all these cases, which is guns in America. Where other Western civilized societies, Australia, right?
Yeah.
When those countries had mass shootings that cost lives, they only had it once.
Right.
Because they took the position that that was not an acceptable thing for their society. They were going to get rid of that tool that was making it so easy to cost human lives. And that's just not a conversation that we're ready for in America. We'll talk about super predators, we'll racialize Black youth, and we'll make them the scapegoat of a society that's failing its children.
Yeah, you know, obviously you have the title President CEO, and to many they see that title and they feel like it's, you know, you have some sort of glory, right?
Uh-oh.
But you know, I mean, look, President CEO. But what frustrates you in that position? Do you ever feel like, you know what, I've done all I can?
Yeah. I mean, we're always trying to support organizations. It's frustrating to turn on the news, to pick up the paper and see the framing of some of these critical issues, right? You and I were talking about the gutting of local media, the gutting of newspaper, the gutting of intelligent truth telling, right? It is very demoralizing to me. I also think to people I work with, to know how much we know. We know that evidence shows that when you support programs and services for youth, it's a better outcome than incarceration, right? We know that the central element to a conversation on gun violence, if we really cared about human life, is having a conversation about guns. There's some things we know, but it's hard constantly to be bombarded with these nonsensical conversations and discussions about these issues because that's all think that's all we can create space for as a society right now. So sometimes, yeah, I go home and my head's hung a little bit lower, but I try to remind myself, I try to remind my team, we signed up for a lifetime fight, right?
Yeah.
It's like full freedom of Black people, the full equity that I'm trying to realize I know I'll never enjoy in my lifetime. My job is not to finish it, right? In a game of football, I'm just trying to gain yards.
Right.
I caught my ball, as we were talking about, from the Ida B. Wells
Yeah.
and those people. They got us a few yards. I'm going to gain a few more and throw it to a future generation so that they can get that touchdown.
And you are the youngest to hold the title of President and CEO for the Public Welfare Foundation. How much more does that add to the pressure you already have?
You know, I don't necessarily feel a lot of pressure because I'm younger. I also work real hard to reject the idea that I have to carry additional pressure because I'm a Black woman, because I'm a woman, because I take the position, if we went in my office, there's a picture of my grandmother that sits behind she sits behind me on my desk. She quite literally has my back. And I'm like, as a Black woman, as a young Black woman, like, our generation, the blood of our people spilled over this country. It's been paid, like the road for me has been paid time and time again. Yeah. So it's like, I'm not worried about that. I'm trying to show up, do an authentic job, and I'm gonna give it the best I got. Like, I'm gonna work hard, but it's like, I don't apologize for being younger because that perspective is necessary. I don't apologize for being a people of color because for too long, this leadership has been lacking and our work, these movements need it.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned Black women. The society in general, right, has, even today, don't value and understand the Black woman as it should.
Yeah.
And so you do carry, regardless, you have to carry that with you.
Yeah.
You're a role model. As
Yeah.
a role model to other Black women, what's your primary message?
My primary message to other Black women is that you're enough. Right? Like, I'm always trying to say to younger Black women, it's like, you can relax your shoulders, right? You don't have to be perfect. And especially when you're young in your career and you're in that phase where you feel like you just got a hard, square run, you're enough. You're gonna get there, right? We're enough. The sacrifice that has been made for us to start to acquire the small space that's given to us right now is so great. Our dues have been paid many times over. And if there's something, we have to have some hubris, some ability to harness that fundamental understanding of all that's been sacrificed for us so that we can take up our space. I tell people all the time, I love to go into meetings, especially like meetings with all white, and just like man spread, legs open, taking up, like quite literally sometimes I'm like, I am physically taking up this space that has not been provided for Black women. And I think it's important for us to know that, to understand that, to remind ourselves from that. In every perfect moment will you be able to hold that? No, but it's like young women need to know it. Like, we need to apologize a lot less and just be okay with when we're in a good space, when we're having a bad day, just being the authentic leaders that the world has yet to fully see.
A special thanks to Candice Jones and the Public Welfare Foundation for that in-depth interview. Tomorrow we will discuss the RAP Act, which, if passed, would prohibit prosecutors from using hip-hop artists' lyrics against them during a criminal or civil trial, as is the current case with Young Thug and Gunner down in Georgia. We will have the two Congress members responsible for the legislation, Hank Johnson of Georgia and Jamal Bowman of New York.